Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Trump prepares to announce his US tariffs on his so-called Liberation Day. It comes as Elon Musk will step back from his current government role as Tesla's sales tumble. All countries could face a 20% tax on US imports as the US president claims Americans have been treated unfairly. And trade partners, including the UK and China, wait to discover how the decision will affect their individual economies and lead to potential job losses. To our top story, and President Trump's so-called Liberation Day is here at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, live from the White House Rose Garden. The US president could announce a 20% tax on all countries currently trading with the United States. US investors have warned there could be a risk to sales, margins and profits as import duties rise. Global markets have already been feeling the impact, with the tech-heavy Nasdaq falling more than 1.3% earlier today. That includes stocks of Tesla, which also tumbled today before bouncing back after the White House confirmed Elon Musk will step back from public service when his work at Doge is complete. I'm now joined by Steve Hanke, Professor of Applied Economics at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Steve, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining me. So the White House have now confirmed Elon Musk is stepping back from his government role, first reported by Politico. So Tesla was down almost 6% earlier following first quarter sales today. But then we did see the stock reverse its loss off the back of this announcement. Are you surprised that Elon Musk is exiting the government?
No, not at all. I knew that this marriage that Trump and Musk had would not continue in its original form. Musk just takes up too much of the media space, and the president wants to monopolize it. So that's one of the main issues. Now, going forward, maybe Musk won't be a front man and quite out there over his skis in the media, but he'll certainly be a right-hand man of Trump. He's not going away. He's just going to disappear from the center of the stage. That's all that's going to happen.
So, Steve, basically, Trump's going to have more of the spotlight on him. But let's turn our attention to tariffs. It's a sea of red across the markets as jitters spread on Wall Street. Why are we witnessing so much global uncertainty ahead of Trump's tariffs announcement? We do know that for a long time, Trump has discussed tariffs, even in his campaigning.
Well, he's discussed them in the past, and he's a believer in tariffs. He's a mercantilist. He's not a free trader. So we know all of that. But what's going to happen today at 4 p.m. Eastern Time is that we'll have some certainty, or at least temporary certainty, about exactly what's going to happen. Before, in the past few weeks, he bobs and weaves. One day he says one thing, the next day he says another thing. So we're going to have some temporary certainty on what's happening that will be delivered for this afternoon. Now, the problem with regard to the markets, remember that tariffs are bad news because they're taxes on international transactions. And any time you put a tax on, you put a tax wedge on economic activity. So that means that the net that's left over after a wedge goes in is less than it was before. That means profits are going to be lower than they would before. And in the United States, this has always been a big deal. If you look back in the 1930s, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was something like we'll probably get from Trump, caused the stock market to crash. In anticipation of that, the stock market, the Dow Jones peaked out in September of 1929. And by the time July 1932 rolled around, what had happened? The market had lost 89% of its value. It had completely collapsed, and the reason for that was the tariff. That was a big part of the thing. The other part of it, by the way, was the fact that the money supply was contracting in the United States during the Great Depression. It's only contracted 4 other times historically since 1913, and now it's contracting. Since the summer of 2022, the money supply is actually contracted. The stock of money in the United States is less now than it was in the summer of 2022. As a result, we'll have a slowdown coming. And then added to that, we get the tariff tax, which will drive it down even further. So I anticipate, the consensus thinks that the profit growth in the United States for shares that are traded in New York is about 15%. I think it'll end up about 5%. So we're going to see a big adjustment coming in the market, I think.
So Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, has said tariffs will have a negative worldwide impact. You just spoke to me right now about the impact we could see in the US markets, but do you agree with her assessment on a global stage?
Yes, I do. Taxes always slow everything down. So if you tax international trade, you're going to get less of it. And if you get less of it, it's bad news for profits. And if you have bad news for profits, you get an adjustment downward in the stock market. And in addition to that, you'll have continued, this won't be certain. Whatever is announced at 4 p.m. today, Eastern time, won't be certain because Trump will change his mind. So you'll have a lot of regime uncertainty associated with this. And when you have regime uncertainty associated with the flow of income that's coming in, what happens? People discount that flow of income at higher interest rates, and that makes the present value of the flow go down. So that means the stock prices will go down.
Steve, you know, obviously, when Donald Trump was campaigning, a lot of it was on the economy to make people have money in their pockets again in America. He also wants to increase manufacturing, bring America back to the golden age. You know, he's touted this as something that America really needs to do to bring down its trade deficit with the rest of the world. Do you think he can achieve what he's looking to do by bringing in these tariffs? Is there any silver lining to the announcement we could get today?
Oh, no, not at all. This isn't Liberation Day. This is Doom Loop Day. Tariffs are a complete loser's game. Trump thinks that trade deficits are made by nefarious actions by foreigners, and he thinks that trade deficits are bad. Actually, trade deficits are created and made in the USA, because the savings in the USA they're less than the investments in the USA. And naturally, we know from economic theory and principles that the gap, that deficiency is filled in with a trade deficit. And it's easy to finance in the United States. We have tremendously thick capital markets. We have the US dollar, the international reserve currency. Everyone wants to be invested in the United States and in dollars. So we've had a deficit since 1975 in the United States. It's easy to finance. It's made in the USA, and it's good for Americans. A trade deficit's good, not bad. So the whole premise of the Trump tariff madness is wrong. Deficits are good. They're made in the USA. They're good. They're good for Americans. Americans consume much more than they produce, and they're easy to finance. So what's the problem? He's got the whole thing upside down.
Steve Hanke, Professor of Applied Economics at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Thank you so much for your insights this evening.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Ukrainian military officials say Russian drone strikes in eastern Ukraine have killed at least one person and injured 10. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry said it intercepted and destroyed 93 Ukrainian drones over the Kursk region on Tuesday night. It comes as a senior Russian negotiator, Kirill Dmitriev, the chief of Russia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, is expected in Washington to meet with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Yemen's Houthis say an attack which they are blaming on the United States has killed 4 people. Houthi media reports have claimed U.S. airstrikes on areas controlled by the Iran-backed group took place in multiple regions, including the group's northern stronghold of Sadr. The United States has not confirmed it carried out these strikes. A Democratic U.S. senator has broken the record for the longest speech in Senate history. Cory Booker stood up for more than 25 hours to deliver an anti-Trump speech in protest against President Donald Trump's unconstitutional actions. And Hollywood actor Val Kilmer has died from pneumonia at the age of 65. The star fronted some of the biggest movies of the 80s and 90s, including Top Gun and Batman Forever, and also my favorite, True Romance. Now, returning to those looming U.S. tariffs, which President Trump believes may affect all countries. Although the Trump administration expects trillions of U.S. dollars in new revenues, there's worries that the impact will send shockwaves through the stock market and global economy. Trump's motto of America First has a potential to damage its relationships with the rest of the world. However, here's what he told reporters just earlier this week.
We have Liberation Day, as you know, on April 2nd. Because, and I'm not referring to Canada, but many countries have taken advantage of us, the likes of which nobody even thought was possible for many, many decades, for decades. And, you know, that has to stop. We're going to end up with a very good relationship with Canada and a lot of the other countries. Some we probably won't. It won't be so pleasant. But I think most countries are agreeing with me. They actually, many of them have actually apologized. They said, look, we have taken advantage. And
we can now speak to Angie Wong, Miami Executive District Committee woman. Angie, great to have you on the show. Before we get to tariffs, Elon Musk is stepping back in the coming weeks from his current role as governing partner. Is this news a shock? And could this be related to slumping Tesla sales?
Well, absolutely. I'm sure the shareholders and stockholders of Tesla is asking him to step back a little bit as Americans and protesters here are lighting Teslas on fire in protest of Elon Musk's involvement in the Trump administration. So I have no doubt that is related. Elon Musk, make no doubt, is still working very hard behind the scenes. He's formed an amazing team to do the work. And I think that although his figurehead may not be there every single day on the news, certainly work is still being done at Doge.
Donald Trump has us all on tender hooks, Angie, as he prepares to announce the administration's tariff plans. The U.S. markets are lower in anticipation. What can we expect from the president when he makes that announcement in the Rose Garden later?
Well, certainly it's developing minute by minute. Already we're seeing some clarifications on what these tariffs actually mean. Before, it was very broad stroked. Every country is getting tariffed by the U.S., getting reciprocal tariffs. And certainly phone calls are being made to the White House over the last few days, trying to basically work a deal out with the art of the deal president. So we already have Israel, Mexico, and Canada who have all said that they are going to be canceling their U.S. tariffs in trade for, well, working with the United States. And we're hoping for more of that. Just in the last hour, Trump has tailored his tariff talks to individualize them by country and industries, because he understands that the auto industry and the energy sectors, well, we still need that as Americans. We cannot push that one too hard. So I think you're going to see that at the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time announcement. And we're going to probably see a lot more definition so that this is not so broad stroked. And certainly countries are on standby because they're all trying to do some last minute dealing with President Trump.
Yes, indeed. And we have seen some other countries come out and say they're going to put reciprocal tariffs on. They don't know exactly what that is yet, but they're waiting to respond. Trump's tariffs are set to hit allies and enemies who, in the words of the White House, are ripping America off. But the U.S. economy relies heavily on imports. Are you and the rest of Americans prepared to pay more for everything that you purchase?
Well, absolutely. And anyone who's been following Trump during the campaign trail, he's been taunting this for the last 4 years. And I do agree with some of the points. I think it's time we stop talking about free trade and start talking about fair trade. And that's all he really wants from all this. Up until yesterday, Canada was taxing Americans 270% on dairy products and eggs. We don't think that's very fair. So I think we have a president now who wants to renegotiate all of that so that it is more fair to Americans, because ultimately, yes, we are prepared. Americans are prepared for short-term pain, but in the long term, what do we get out of this? We get protection of American jobs and more manufacturing jobs to bring back to our homeland. We have, we have national security, and this is also going to strengthen the U.S. dollar in the long term. So will Americans take the short-term pain? Yes, we'll do so, but how much? I think that's the ultimate question. Midterms for us are around the corner. We've already kicked off the midterm election season. We need this to be a quick result, and hopefully President Trump is going to feel that pressure and not hold us to the fire for too long.
Angie, I actually wanted to just come to the midterms because Trump obviously campaigned on the economy and making America great again. If we see the tariffs becoming inflationary and the cost of living in America going up, do you think this could hit Trump during the midterms?
Well, 100%. And this is going to be every American's issue come the midterms. How much are we paying for eggs? How much are we paying for gas? How much are we paying for automobiles, right? And I think that is going to be the determining factor for Americans to get out to vote during the midterms. So he can play this game, this art of the deal game, and he could swing these tariffs as far right as he possibly can right now. But for how long can he do that for before we really start suffering? And I think world leaders understand that, and that's their leverage right now with the White House. Again, we're prepared to do this for a while, but certainly not for years. So I think Trump has to be very, very careful when he throws out big words like we're just going to tax everyone with tariffs. Ultimately, the plan is to get rid of personal income tax here in the U.S. That's the agenda. That's the goal, and replace them with worldwide tariffs. Again, I believe in the Trump administration. I think Peter Navarro behind all of this is doing a great job. He certainly has worked out some of the numbers. Will Americans have the appetite long term? Not sure.
Miami Executive District Committee woman Angie Wong, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you again.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Israel says it will expand military operations in Gaza and take over a large territory to make them into security zones. Defense Minister Israel Katz says the operation aims to, he says, destroy and clear the area of terrorists and terrorist infrastructure. The move is expected to displace scores of Palestinians. The Republicans have won a special congressional election in Florida to fill the seat of National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Their success comes with a reduced majority and against Democrat Josh Weil. In other Florida special elections, Republican Jimmy Patrons is won over Democrat Gay Baltimore to replace former Representative Matt Gaetz. Myanmar's junta chief is riding a wave of diplomatic progress as his country reels from the effects of a devastating quake. The ruling general's position has strengthened with the opening of diplomatic channels that remain dormant following the 4-year-long civil war. Conversations with the heads of India, Malaysia and China have led to planeloads of aid. And tech mogul Elon Musk has once again claimed the top spot on the annual Forbes list of billionaires. Musk's net worth grew by 75% to an estimated $342 billion. Meta founder Mark Zuckerberg takes the second spot, followed by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. President Donald Trump comes in at number 700 with a net worth of $5.1 billion. Along with the rest of the world, the United Kingdom awaits news of how the tariffs will affect them. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Trump spoke on the phone earlier this week, discussing the so-called productive negotiations towards a UK-US economic prosperity deal. But it's the UK car trade which could feel the impact most, with more than 25,000 jobs at risk if auto exports fall in the US. Earlier today, Starmer addressed Parliament in regard to the UK-US relations.
Thanks. Mr. Speaker, we've been preparing for all eventualities ahead of the confirmation of US tariffs later today. Let me be clear with the House. A trade war is in nobody's interests. And the country deserves, and we will take, a calm, pragmatic approach. That's why constructive talks are progressing to agree a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. That's why we're working with all industries and sectors likely to be impacted.
We can now go live to London to speak to Sir Jeremy Greenstock, Chairman of Gatehouse Advisory Partners and former UK Ambassador to the United Nations. Jeremy, I can't get it. I'm so sorry. I do apologise. Apologies. Let's start with Starmer. So Starmer also said constructive talks with America are progressing to agree a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. But it seems the UK are as much in the dark about the incoming tariffs as the rest of the world.
Yes, the Americans have not been transparent about what they're intending to do. They clearly haven't given the UK any kind of an exit route for this. They're going to hit all countries everywhere, it seems. But it's important that we already have a series of talks ongoing with the Americans on a bilateral trade deal now that we're out of the European Union. And that is an important possible exit route for Sir Keir Starmer in dealing with this tariff threat. But they're going to be on in the first instance. It's going to harm UK exports to the US. We don't know how long they're going to last. And we don't know to what extent President Trump is going to be committed to tariffs for the whole period of his tenure in the White House. So there are plenty of uncertainties that have got to be worked through. And I think the Americans themselves, as you've been discussing earlier in your program, will have to decide whether they are good for the US and for the US consumer, or they're going to produce inflation and a loss of jobs and all sorts of other disadvantages. So there are a lot of uncertainties here.
Yes, and that's exactly what Angie was saying to me earlier. How long will the American public put up with things if the cost of living does rise? But the British government's trade deficit with the US is lower than a majority of European countries. What is the UK hoping for when these tariffs are announced? And will the so-called special relationship actually carry any weight in this game?
The special relationship is a nice piece of rhetoric. It doesn't mean very much in the real hard life of business. And if any American president is going to be dealing with the hard end of business, it's going to be President Trump. So there's no sentiment here. There's no favors being offered. The British have got to earn their relationship with the United States. And that is what the Prime Minister is going to have to look at. I don't think the figures show that we are treating the United States, if you take the whole range of British trade and investment with the US, at all unfairly. So we are at the margins of what the United States might be able to retrieve by way of unfair practice abroad. But clearly, the president is aiming at everybody in order to create maximum leverage for the deals that will follow. The time taken for all of this, I think, is going to be damaging, whether it's for the UK, for Europe, for the Middle East, for everybody. We do not need more trade wars, more cross tariffs in a global economy which is already suffering from the antagonism to globalization that has come in over the last few years. So this is a very controversial use of instrument by the Americans. And I think, as some of your previous interlocutors have been saying, it could easily blow back on the Americans themselves. But it's certainly not going to aid or help UK-US trade in the short term.
So today, the Institute for Public Policy Research released a survey which warns that Trump's car tariffs could put 25,000 UK jobs at risk. Do you agree with this assessment? And as you were just talking to me, we are already in uncertainty, and this could add to this. How worrying is this for the UK government's growth plans and also just on a geopolitical scale?
Well, I haven't made my own estimate, obviously, of the number of job cuts that may come in the car industry. I think that's the worst case scenario. No company is going to make immediate decisions. They'll see how things pan out over the following weeks. We are in the whole process of bilateral trade talks with the US. So while that is a lovely figure to put in the headlines of journalistic comments, it's only a worst case scenario. But you're right, it comes at a time when the UK is struggling to produce economic growth. The British Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Treasury, are looking for ways to increase UK growth. And this is not a measure that will aid that whole process. So there are all sorts of other things going on at the same time to mend the British economy. This has come at an embarrassing time for the government in that effort to rebuild our economy.
So, Jeremy, just very briefly, what does this mean for US soft power around the world?
I think the Americans are taking a risk. Already, Europe has lowered its trust in the US. You can see that in the public comments. And trust is an important part of soft power. So this search for leverage, this almost bullying approach from the Americans is not going to increase their influence around the world. I think this will play out in other areas where soft power is important. So it's a great risk that President Trump is taking.
Sir Jeremy Greenstock, Chairman of Gatehouse Advisory Partners and former UK Ambassador to the UN. I'm glad I got your name right in the end. Thank you so much for joining me. Much appreciated. China has long been in the firing line of President Trump's tariffs. During his election period, he threatened a 60% flat duty on all Chinese imports coming into the US. Now, a reduction could be made in exchange for the sale of Chinese-owned platform TikTok. The Trump administration have now confirmed Amazon has put a bid in to buy the social media site. Leigh has more on how Beijing has been reacting to and preparing for the latest chapter in the US-China trade war.
China is no stranger to US tariffs. The difficulty this time round, though, is the scale and the scope. Since his return to the White House, US President Donald Trump hasn't just been targeting specific industries. He announced a blanket duty on all Chinese imports. And a month later, he doubled it. His desires to slap tariffs on other countries might seem like on the surface for China, well, at least they're not the only ones this time round. But in reality, Trump's tariff diplomacy threatens the stability of the global economy, which inevitably has consequences on China too. But we know also that in recent weeks, Washington has been dangling a potential TikTok for tariff relief deal to China. As always with Trump, it seems like everything can be a deal. He has torn up traditional diplomatic protocol. Beijing isn't going to go that far when it comes to diplomacy, but it has been thinking outside the box too to deal with the situation. China announced that it would like to coordinate a response with Japan and South Korea on the issue of US tariffs. The three countries who notoriously struggle to get along have revived trade dialogue for the first time in 5 years. Seoul and Tokyo say no concrete decision has yet been made, but it is interesting to note that everyone, the US's friends and foes, are having to come up with some kind of contingency plan. China has also recently hosted a top international business meeting, trying to woo leaders to invest more in their country. A red carpet welcome for Tim Cook of Apple, the executives of Pfizer, FedEx, Visa, etc. They even got a sit down with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Since Trump's election, Beijing has certainly shown that it is willing to negotiate, and it is also willing to strike back with retaliatory tariffs in its arsenal, as well as export controls on critical minerals, all the while trying to defend its own interests and its own priorities.
Leigh in Beijing, thank you. A reminder of our top stories. President Trump prepares to announce his US tariffs on his so-called Liberation Day. It comes as Elon Musk will step back from his current government role as Tesla's sales tumble. All countries could face a 20% tax on US imports as the US president claims Americans have been treated unfairly. And trade partners, including the UK and China, wait to discover how the decision will affect their individual economies and lead to potential job losses. And that's all from us on W News. Thanks so much for joining us. And from tomorrow, W News will be broadcast an hour earlier. Plus, we'll be bringing you W News Extra a little later on as we provide you with 6 hours of content right here on Al Arabiya News. And of course, more of me. But looking ahead tonight, Hadley Gamble's interview with the economic historian Dan Jurgen is coming up next, followed by The Dressing Room. And of course, don't miss Tom Burgess Watson with GNT. Lots to watch. Good night.